Mr. Azran, are you ready?
I am absolutely ready to go.
All right, okay. So, hi everyone. My name is Searchy. I'm the host for this session today. Thank you for tuning in today. Hope you guys had a great long weekend. So today we are very lucky to have our CEO of Naluri, who also is a successful entrepreneur. He must have endured a lot of stress from dealing with customers, and a lot of stakeholders, investors. Stress is inevitable. So how is he going to turn stress into positive energy? I'm so curious about that. And we are so lucky today to have Mr. Azran here to share some of his tips. So pass the stage to you, Mr. Azran.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Searchy. Thank you, guys. Hope you guys are having a great afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. So I'm going to start by asking you a question. So if you can type in the chat, how is your current stress level now? Is it less than before March 18 when we had the whole COVID-19 movement control? Is it about the same, or has it gone up since before COVID-19 happened? Let me know. How are your current stress levels? No one is stressed? Okay, so I'm going to ask you another question. Tell me whether you agree or disagree with these statements. Number one, stress is negative and we should find ways to avoid or control it. And stress can deplete my health and vitality. Tell me in the chat whether you agree or disagree with these statements.
Right, guys, feel free to write in the comments. So I guess there's some delay. We will need some response time from the audience. So feel free to write on the comments, okay? Right, just to share some thoughts with Azran. He would love to discuss with you guys. All right, so we have got some response here.
All right, so Azreen agrees. This is it's like very high level of stress, and stress should be avoided as it can affect our health. So I'm going to jump on to the next question, which is stress can help me learn to grow, and stress can also enhance my performance and productivity. So tell me whether you agree or disagree with these statements. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you guys for sharing. So this is kind of what we're going to delve in today, right? In a way, the short answer is it depends. Stress can be debilitating, can affect our health, but with the right mindsets and the right way of looking at it and the right preparation, stress can also be a positive factor. It can help us grow. It can definitely enhance our performance and productivity. And so that's kind of what I want to share with you today. But I want to start by relating again sort of my swimming story. So tell me in the chat if you've heard of my swimming story, but I'm going to give you a new twist today. But for those of you who are new, about 10 years ago, when I was turning 40 years old, I had never learned how to swim before. That's right, never, because I was terrified of stress, of swimming in the open sea, because I grew up in the 1970s. And for those of you who remember in the 1970s, there was not one, not two, but 3 Jaws movies, right? And that really left a major impact on me. I was terrified of going into the sea because you never know if there was any shadow, any movement. What if that was a shark? What if that was a monster? So I avoided going to the sea. I avoided swimming for 40 years. And the thing is, right, with things that we're afraid of, when things that we're concerned about, when we make the decision to avoid it, it actually gives us temporary relief, right? Ah, good. Let's say if we went to the beach, I don't have to go to the sea, I feel relieved. But what that does also is that it amplifies our fear, right? It causes us to be even more afraid because we have this feel good factor of not doing it, right? So avoiding the causes of our stresses and our fears actually increases the amount that we fear. Until one day someone decided or challenged me to say, look, you've been running marathons, why don't you try triathlons? Right? And I was very interested with picking up a new sport, but I did not know how to swim. And so oftentimes when we're faced with these big challenges, thinking about how do I swim in the sea is too big of a goal. But if we break it down into the smallest possible, easiest step to start, we have a way of going. And so my first step was to sign up for my very first swimming class when I turned 40 years old, right? And in that swimming class, it was me and other 5-year-old children, right? With this woman in Bangsar who was conducting swimming lessons in her backyard, right? So it was in the small pool. And for the first day, the only thing we did was put head in water, blow bubbles. That was it. And I felt, I think I can do it. I, mustered the courage to put my face under the water and blow bubbles. That was the first lesson. The second lesson was when she started throwing coins down to the pool. It was about a waist deep pool, and I had to go down and pick up the coins. And that gave me a sense of accomplishment. And very soon, I started to be able to progress. And after 4, 5, 6 months, I thought I was ready for my first triathlon. And a triathlon, of course, is swimming in an open sea, right? It's very, very different from swimming in a pool, because suddenly when you jump into that sea, you're jumping in with hundreds of other people, and they're kicking and shoving, and you get knocked and your goggles get pushed and water comes in, and I completely panicked and hyperventilated, and I could not finish. I had to be rescued. I was very frustrated. I decided to sign up for my second swimming instructor. We practiced again. This time we practiced in the sea. I thought I was ready. I signed up for my second swimming triathlon, a triathlon, this time in Singapore at East Coast Park back in 2012. And the day before the triathlon, they allowed us to practice around the lap. That went well. But again, Sunday morning when it came to race time, right, when everyone is jumping into the sea, hundreds and hundreds of participants, everyone is pushing and shoving. And again, my heart beat so fast that I felt out of control. I hyperventilated. I had a panic attack, and I had to be rescued out again. So again, very frustrated. I signed up for my third swimming coach. This time he's a national swimmer. And he said, if you want to work with me, you've got to be in the pool Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 5 days a week at 6 a.m. Because if you ever train with competitive swimmers, they're extremely disciplined. But the most important thing was the frequency, right? Because you have to do it for 5 days a week for several months, that frequency finally gave me the courage, the confidence, where it became routine and automatic. And by the end of that year, I was able to complete my first Ironman triathlon in Western Australia, interestingly, because in Western Australia, they still have great white sharks. But what I want to share with you today, though, is it's not just about the repetition. What I had to learn was this. Even today, 10 years on, right, after competing multiple Ironman triathlons, I still am afraid of deep water. It never gets to a stage where the fear goes away, because if you wait for that fear to go away before you start, you're never going to start. But there are things that I do now so that I don't let the fear hold me back from starting, right? And so there are rituals that I have to get into the mindset, because when we're under a lot of stress, when we're under a lot of pressure, that's the body signal sending us these hormones surging through our bodies to get ready to deal with that threat. But if we interpret it in a different way, we interpret it as something that's going to threaten us, that's going to put us in harm, and we become very nervous, we lose control. And so we need a set of rituals so that even though the body's sending us signals to perform, we start to focus the brain on, I'm getting ready to perform. So for example, right, if I had a big meeting, if I had a big presentation, which still today, right, will cause me a lot of stress. But some of the subtle ways that I get ready is very similar to how, for example, ancient warriors, tribal warriors, when they're getting ready for battle, they have war paint on, right? Because these are small cues that get us ready to perform at the level so that the fear doesn't stop us, right? It gets us into battle mode. Right. So for example, certain days when I really know I've got to be ready, there are certain small cues that I do. For example, I have bracelets that I wear, right? And I only wear these bracelets on days when I know something big is happening. And so the act of putting it on sends signals to my brain that, this is ready, I'm about to perform. Even small things, right? Like the cologne that I wear. So I have one set which is for normal daily use, but I also have my special bottle of cologne for those special days, because our sense of smell is actually a very powerful sense. And if you start to build or use a scent just for days in battle, just the act of putting it on gets you mentally ready to take charge, right? And that is why I started this presentation with music, because music is also another big cue. So before races, right, before jumping into that sea, right, maybe 45 minutes before the race, I have the same exact playlist that I'm playing on. And that is why when Erica says, hey, that song is from 10 years ago, because 10 years ago, that song worked for me, right? And I still use it because it's the familiarity that subconsciously sends signals to my brain that I'm ready to perform, right? That I can see the sea, I'm ready, I've got all my training, right? And I need to get into this mental state to be able to go into the water. Now, there are two other things, because the moment we go into the water, again, my heart starts beating, right? And thoughts still float into my head, right? What happens if this? What happens if that? And so what I need to teach my brain is what I've got to give my brain homework to do, right? So for example, when I'm swimming, because that's usually when I'm really stressed out, I've got to focus on right arm in, head position, breathe, left arm in, catch and pull, right? Things that I keep saying so that the brain is focusing on what I'm doing rather than entertaining the negative thoughts. And I tell you that only works for about 5 to 10 minutes, because once in a triathlon race, within 10 minutes, here's the most stressful part of the race. For those of you who are familiar or who've seen a triathlon race, and that is the first turn, right? Because there's usually a big buoy in the middle of the sea and all the participants turn. And it's in that one turn where suddenly everyone bunches up to get to as close as possible, right? So that you don't have to swim a further distance. And in that bunch is when things get really stressful, because triathletes are dirty. They will push you and pull your leg and shove you and kick you and everything. And I know that's what happens, right? And so suddenly, even what I tell myself in terms of the arm movements and the head movements and the leg movements are not enough, because my heart rate starts beating faster and faster and faster. So I need to use another tool to deal with that level of pressure. And that other tool is when I tell myself, right, my children are ahead, 50 meters ahead, 100 meters ahead, and they may be drowning. I've got to go after them and save them, right? Because suddenly when we're focused on someone else, right, the brain starts to get into a different level of action, right? Because suddenly it deals with your elevated heart rate and blood pressure, but in a way that you've got to go out there and help them. And so this imagery becomes a powerful imagery that I call on in those moments of almost panic, right? And so we've got to find these imageries and these tools, especially when it's about helping someone else that we care for, right? So that we channel that in terms of like, I've got to start focusing, I've got to get to my children, rather than letting the panic overwhelm us and then we start to lose control. So giving the brain something very specific to focus on is a very, very powerful technique to deal with that fear. But if you want to know the one thing that has taken my swimming game or ability to deal with that fear and pressure to another level, is when several years ago, I decided to confront my ultimate fear. I went shark cage diving, right? Off the coast of Adelaide in Australia, where, it was terrifying to be in this cage. The water is really, really cold, and you can see the sharks swimming around you, right? And it's when I know I can get through that situation, it's what allows me to now be able to deal with swimming in a different manner, right? Because if we keep avoiding our biggest fears, we're never going to overcome it. Now, another situation, right, when it comes to dealing with fear, very interesting. I used to work in an airline, right? And some passengers are afraid when turbulence happens, right? You start to hold on to your seat much, you're gripping it, or you might be gripping the person next to you and you're terrified because turbulence can cause panic, right? So here's the thing. When some people say, calm down, say a prayer, that actually does not work. Because when we're under threat, like for example, in a turbulence in a plane, the body's biological reaction, right, is cortisol starts flowing, adrenaline, norepinephrine starts to flow because the body is getting primed to deal with this threat, right? So the heart starts beating faster, your blood pressure rises, your muscles are tense. And so trying to tell yourself to calm down doesn't work, right? Because it goes against your biological state. But here's the thing, right? In moments of stress and fear and anxiety, those same hormones that are causing our body to tense up is the same biological reaction, the same hormones that happen when we're excited, when we're passionate, right? Same cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine. And so framing the situation, for example, saying, wow, this is exciting. When I get home, I'm going to tell my friends. And you can tell yourself that for 10 times, the body starts to change, it starts to adapt, right? And when your mind starts to focus on, okay, if anything happens to this plane, I know where the exit door is, I know who I need to take, I need to make sure I leave behind my belongings. Focusing the brain on actions moves the brain's thoughts from the more unhealthy, uncontrolled panic thoughts, right? And the body actually responds when we start to reframe the situation very, very differently. Exactly, Erica, conditioning. So the thing is with our brain, right, is it's receiving like 50 million sensory inputs in any one moment, right? From what we see, what we hear, what we smell, what we taste, what we're touching, right? The thoughts in our head, but the brain can only process about 7 or 8 at any one time, right? And so the way it filters everything out is based on anything that it's not familiar with. And so the brain uses these as shortcuts to deal with anything that's unknown. It doesn't like anything that's volatile, unknown, complex, unpredictable. It prefers routine, stability, predictability, reliability, right? And so the moment when we're under these threats, right, the brain starts to look for familiar patterns. And this is where we've got to be very careful, because not all familiar patterns are helpful. Because if one of the familiar patterns is don't swim, that might be a shark, right? You react naturally that way, right? And that is why sometimes dealing with these stressful situations is about knowing that the brain is trying to do these shortcuts, but how do we then replace it with different alternate thoughts? So a lot of studies show, right, that continued stress, right, because when those cortisol, adrenaline, and norepinephrine hormones are surging to our body nonstop, right, it can ultimately cause chronic high blood pressure, which ultimately clogs our arteries and leads to heart attacks. In fact, people who are experiencing stress, right, have a 43% increase of mortality from heart conditions. However, this only applies to people who believe that stress is unhealthy, right? So if you actually believe that stress is good for you, stress is what gets you ready to perform, that number becomes completely negligible. In fact, it's even lower than people who aren't experiencing any stress at all. And so there's some biology to this because, right, when you're under chronic stress and you believe, right, that stress is unhealthy, right, those hormones are actually causing your blood vessels. So this is like the cross section of your blood vessel. It starts to tighten, right, and that's why we have chronic blood pressure, right, because the body's like all tensed up. But the moment you believe that stress is about body signal to get you ready to perform, to get you to perform at your best, blood vessels actually do not constrict, right? And that's why we're able to perform much, much better because we're framing the situation differently. So there's actually a biological response to how we perceive stress. Now, first of all, right, stress is absolutely necessary for survival. If we did not experience any stress, we're not going to survive, right? For, the whole evolutionary process, right, from when early humans in the savannah in Africa, right, stress was an important signal because stress was meant to get you ready to face the threats that you face, right? For example, this antelope, right? So if your antelope is just grazing and suddenly out of the blue, a lion comes to chase after you, right? And if a lion is chasing, immediately the stress hormones get triggered. The cortisol starts flooding, the adrenaline starts pumping, your heart's beating faster, your blood pressure is rising, your muscles tense, and you're ready to outsprint the lion. If for any of you who ever find yourself in the savannah and a lion is chasing after you, here's a good tip. You only need to outsprint the lion for 30 seconds. If you can outsprint the lion for 30 seconds, you're good to go because most lions will give up after 30 seconds. Cool? Because, similarly, the lion's also primed up, right? And these hormone surges are in very short blasts, right? And so once that lion gives up, right, and it just starts panting because it couldn't catch that antelope, the antelope may still just be 50 meters away. The lion's 50 meters from the antelope, and the lion's given up. The antelope can still see the lion, but you know what? The stress hormones immediately dissipate, and the antelope can start grazing again. That's the beauty of animals, right? The moment the stress threat is gone, it can go back to normal. However, for humans, unfortunately, we've evolved, for better or worse, evolved into something called memory, right? And memory means, right, we start to think about these stress triggers even before they happen, right? And when it keeps going on over and over again, that's when it leads to anxiety and depression. And a simple way of understanding anxiety is when we've evolved to the point where that stress trigger hasn't happened yet, right? Let's say today, no lions hopefully are chasing after you, but it may be your boss getting on your case, your customers are unhappy, your spouse is unhappy at you, you've got all these bills you've got to pay at the end of the month and you don't know where that cash is coming from. These are the same effect as a lion chasing after you, right? So normally that causes a stress, but anxiety is when that hasn't happened yet, but we're already anticipating it and it's causing that same biological reaction. So the boss may not be upset at us, the customer's not yet angry, our spouses are not angry, the month-end bills are not yet due, but we're already stressed out and that's causing anxiety, right? So anxiety starts to get triggered before the actual threat materializes. And another way of thinking about depression is even when that stress trigger is gone, we still have the video playing in our head over and over and over again. And for some people, even childhood trauma, episodes from a distant past, still causes the videos to play in our head over and over and over. And that's what leads to depression, right? So in a way, if you think about that, anxiety is these videos of future threats playing in our heads, and depression is the videos playing in our head of something that's already passed, but we still can't let it go. And this is why, to understand the impact on our biology, I want to share with you one insight, right? So for example, in a typical triathlon race that I compete in, right? Swimming, cycling, running, in that one day, I burned 6,000 calories of energy in that one day. Now, a world champion chess grandmaster competing in a world championship tournament, playing chess burns 6,000 calories. I kid you not, right? You don't have to exercise anymore, guys. You want to lose weight, just play chess. But of course, it's not the act of moving the chess pieces that burns the calories. The world champion chess grandmaster is going through so many permutations, movements. The brain is going again and again and again at very high speeds. It uses up so much energy that these guys will lose 2, 3, it's sometimes 4 kilograms of weight from one chess tournament, right? Because our brains represent only 2% of our body weight, but they consume 20% of the entire energy that the body needs, right? And so when the brain is hyperactive, that's why we can even literally feel physically fatigued and tired, right? And so to me, that's the important thing to understand, right? Is when we don't have the ability to control these thoughts, right? When we allow the stress to overwhelm us, we become physically fatigued. And over time, that fatigue actually leads to diabetes, it leads to heart diseases, and it even leads to cancer. So one of the root causes, the starting point for why the brain gets fatigued is when it has to jump between thoughts of where we are right now in our present to thoughts of the past, remember the depression videos, or thoughts in the future, the anxiety videos. And for a normal person in any one day, the brain is mind wandering, meaning it's thinking about something else outside of the task that you are experiencing right now, 47% of the time. I bet you, for those of you who are listening to this video right now, you're listening to me, but you're also checking your WhatsApp messages, you're answering emails, you're probably trying to, finish up the report that's due tomorrow. You're trying to do multiple things at once, right? And so the brain keeps shifting from one thought pattern to the other. And the more the brain keeps shifting, the more energy it uses. So the one thing we have to be mindful about, right, is in order for the stress to be turned into a positive energy, we've got to reduce mind wandering. And the single biggest culprit of mind wandering is multitasking, right? Somehow we've grown up in this culture where we're told, multitasking is good. It's actually one of the worst things that teaches our brains to go from one thought to the other, right? And actually it teaches our brains to even then think about depressive thoughts from the past and anxious thoughts from the future, right? And so you think you're trying to do 5 things at once, but what you're doing is you're just jumping from one task for 5 seconds, another task for another 3 seconds, another task for another 7 seconds. This creates a lot of energy expenditure and causes a lot of fatigue, right? And it actually encourages the brain to hop around multiple thoughts. So one of the key tenets of turning that positive, the stress triggers from the external environment into something positive is to not allow or to train our brain to be much, much more focused and not keep mind wandering, right? And that means, yes, today's world, we have to do multiple jobs, but multiple jobs is not the same as multitasking, right? Multiple jobs means, okay, I've got to do 10 assignments today, but this next 15 minutes, I'm only going to answer emails. After that, I stop, email notifications go up. I'm going to move to task number 2. I'm going to take the next 45 minutes to write this report and write this report by itself, right? When that's done, I move on to the next task. But each task that I do, I'm 100% focused on the task, right? Because I know Shaifullah says you have to multitask to remain relevant. I'm sorry, but that's actually extremely unhealthy and actually makes you less productive. So if you really want to be at your best game, perform at the highest, yes, you have 10 things to do in one day, but you have to compartmentalize. Do one thing at a time, whether it's in 15-minute blocks or 30-minute blocks or 55-minute blocks. Notice I say 55 and not 60 because you need that 5 minutes to take a break. But if you try to do 3 things at once, I guarantee you, your mind's going to be wandering, you're going to get more fatigued, you're not focused, and your work quality is going to be affected 100%. And that is why when we start to think, how do we then train our brain to perform at its best, to be able to focus and deal with the multiple pressures that we face, right? These 3 things come to mind, right? First, mindfulness. A lot of science showing why it is important, but mindfulness is not just a matter of meditation. It's not just a matter of prayer or just deep breathing. It's more than that. It basically, at the root cause of it, is about doing one thing at a time. Even having dinner with your family, right? Are you having dinner mindfully or not? Simple test. When you have dinner with your family tonight, are you going to engage your family members? Are you going to have conversations, or are you going to check your phone and watch TV at the same time? The more you teach your wife to do multiple things, the more, you're training the brain not to be able to be focused. Sheffield says, my wife says she can multitask. Yeah, unfortunately, you can do it. That doesn't mean you're going to be very good at doing that, because you're basically going to be the jack of all trades and you're not going to be performing 100%. Similarly, for example, exercise. And there's a long conversation on this because while exercise is known to improve focus and reduce depression, guess what, guys? There's good exercise and bad exercise, right? I meet so many top executives and CEOs who say, oh yeah, I exercise regularly. I'm like, okay, what do you do? Tell me what you do. Yeah, I meet the quota of, 2-3 hours every week exercising. Okay, what do you do? Oh, we play futsal from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. And there are literally a lot of people out there who play futsal in the middle of the night for 3 hours straight. What do you do the other 6 days? I don't do anything. So when the body is not adjusted, just 1 day a week, you're pushing it hard playing futsal with 20-year-old guys, right? It actually causes a lot more inflammatory stress rather than building a solid foundation that allows the brain to focus. So for example, when I run, the techniques that I do at a certain right heart rate intensity and a certain mental focus on my breathing and my steps, that's mindful exercise, right? Same thing with when I'm swimming, when I'm cycling. But if you don't control what you do, your exercise is not going to be beneficial, right? Lastly, sleep. Not surprisingly, without enough sleep, the brain's going to be all over the place. So just losing 2.5 hours of sleep, right, can make a big difference in terms of your ability to focus and channel that stress energy into something positive. So I understand Alan Go has a question, right? In this corporate world, we do not have the luxury of doing a single thing at a time. So Alan, I've been a CEO of a public listed company, going through an IPO, dealing with a financial crisis, having to meet payroll. I think the level of stress is massive, but right, dealing with multiple stress triggers does not mean you have to multitask, guys, right? There's a big difference between I'm responsible for 20 things and I'm trying to do 20 things in the same 1 hour, right? And so if yes, as a CEO, I've got to deal with 20, 30 things, but I compartmentalize, right? Emails, the single biggest thing that you can make a huge difference on your ability to focus is if you compartmentalize emails, meaning emails are 9:15 to 9:30, 11 to 11:15, 3 to 3:30, and 5:45 to 6, whatever it is. When I do emails, I batch. But if you keep answering emails throughout the day, your brain is going to be all over the place. And I'm sorry, but you're going to be physically and mentally more fatigued, and you're not going to be as focused, and you're not going to be able to perform at your best. So yeah, we've got 10 things to do every day, but you have to compartmentalize them. Trying to do 10 things at one, recipe for disaster. Now, last point on, is diet as well, right? Because diet can make a big difference. So for example, right, spinach has very high degrees, high content of magnesium, which is an important part of controlling levels of cortisol in our stress. Similarly, fiber allows us to absorb food and not have our hunger hormones go out of control, and protein gives us the energy. Now, there's a lot of advice on diet, but I just want to share with you this one really interesting insight, which is this. There is no one good diet for everyone. So in this chart, right, I show two things, right? Because normally carbohydrates and sugars are the single biggest culprit for, having our hormones go out of place, our insulin's out of control, and it affects our ability to perform. But here is the crucial insight. Different people respond to different foods differently. So I'm going to give you these two examples, right? Person A and person B. And what this chart measures is the amount of blood glucose in your body system, right? So when glucose goes up and down, when it's spiking, that's extremely unhealthy. And periodically, that's what ultimately leads to diabetes and impairs our ability to perform. But for person A, eating ice cream, notice the blood glucose is still pretty stable, right? But the moment he eats white rice, it spikes and then it crashes. But person B, eating that same ice cream can spike and crash, but eating white rice, completely flat, right? And that is why there is no one diet that works for everybody. So, you might hear a lot of success stories with certain people and all that, but actually our genetic composition is very unique and personalized to us. So it's very important to understand what foods causes your blood glucose to spike and what foods are good, stable ones. And if you can identify this is a very crucial part of being able to be better equipped at handling with stress and pressure, knowing what foods allow your insulin levels to be stable versus staying away from foods that cause big spikes and crashes. Now, lastly, for those of you who want some homework after this, I would highly encourage you to check out this TED Talk by Dr. Alia Crum on changing your mindset, because there was this really fascinating study that she did, among other things, where she was told, or she grouped two people in a study, and one group was told through a 3-minute video that stress is unhelpful, stress is causing you to underperform. People are, going to have a lot of physical and medical reactions due to stress. A second group is shown another video, right, where stress can enhance you positively. It can increase your focus. It can allow you to perform at your best. And just from just being told different information, which, by the way, is both are true. It depends on how you look at it, right? The one group that was told that stress is bad for them ended up exhibiting a lot of health adverse effects, from back pains and muscle aches and insomnia, and ultimately high blood pressure, right? So looking at stress differently can actually influence how your body is run. So for us to basically understand, right, what is positive stress, it's important that we understand, like physical health, right? We understand what it means to be physically strong, right? We understand, for example, okay, if I've got high stamina and endurance, that means I'm fit. If I can run fast, that means I'm fit. If I'm strong, I can lift weights, that means I'm fit. If I'm flexible like a gymnast, that means I'm fit, right? If I've got high dexterity and coordination like a Formula One driver, right, that means I'm physically fit. We understand that. But we also need to understand, what does positive mental fitness looks like? Because otherwise, people think of mental health as just an illness or weakness, right? Oh, it's depression, it's stress, it's anxiety. But there's actually positive attributes as well, right? So the equivalent for physical endurance is mental resilience. Mental resilience means when I hit roadblocks and obstacles, I can pick myself up, I can keep going, right? The equivalent of speed is optimism, looking at a situation and being able to see that it's half full rather than only looking at the negative consequences. Just like physical strength, focus is something that you can actually go to a mental gym and learn exercises to actually build your focus. And one part of it, I guarantee you, is learning how to stop multitasking, right? Likewise, with flexibility, it's curiosity. Being aware that your brain is jumping to certain conclusions, just like a lot of you right now. Interesting, when you're hearing my presentation, the brain is sending you signals to only remember things that you agree with, and the brain is sending you signals to filter out everything that you disagree with me, because that is how the brain works. So if there's too much stimulus, it goes back to what's familiar with. And so part of learning the brain muscle on curiosity is learning to pause and not jump to those conclusions, and to being open to more perspectives, right? And finally, social connectedness, which I'm going to talk about soon. And so here's the thing about performing at our peak, right? You need stress. So Usain Bolt cannot run a world championship, world record setting 100-meter sprint without competition next to him, without 100,000 people in the stadium at the Olympics finals, without 100 million people watching him from a live television broadcast. If he was running by himself at a training facility, he never comes close to running a world championship pace, because to perform at the highest peak, you need that stress stimulus, but you also need the right skills to deal with it. And so performing at our best requires to understand that we need the right levels of skills and tools and techniques, as well as the right level of stress. Because if there's no stress, and you've got all the skills and tools, that's where people become bored or relaxed, right? They become apathetic. But if you got too much stress and you don't teach your team members how to deal with that stress, how to maximize it, that's when it turns into worry. It turns into anxiety. So if we're to perform at our best, we have to know what are the skills required to understand focus at the point of stress, right? To understand resilience at the point of stress. Because focus is what tells you, look, there may be crowds and everything, I'm drawing that energy, but I'm 100% focused on my task, right? Resilience is, for example, you're in a game and you're down by 20 points in a basketball game at halftime. Resilience means I can come back. Or maybe for football players, right? Remember Liverpool 2005, right? Where at the Champions League tournament, where they were down 3-0 at halftime, while AC Milan were playing not to lose, Liverpool played to win and finished the game, got to 3-3 and won in overtime. because of resilience, because of the ability to not allow that stress and pressure to lead to thoughts that go all over the place. So if you can control your thoughts, again, by understanding focus and reducing multitasking, you can be able to perform at your peak, because this is how the brain works. Now, how many of you were told, right, that you have a left side of the brain and right side of the brain, right? You were told left side of the brain is where you do analytical, logical thinking, and right side of the brain was your artistic, creative pursuits. Were you told that? Let me know in the chat. Let me know if you were told you got left and right, and whether you think you're left-brained or you're right-brained. Let me know. Okay, so for those of you who believe you're either left brain or right brain, guess what, guys? This is a myth. We do not use one side of our brain for logic and math, and we do not use the other side for creative and artistic pursuits. We use both left and right, both hemispheres, right? So when I do math, I need both left and right, and when I do arts, I need both left and right. But what is true is that the brain has different functions between what's here in the front, the prefrontal cortex, and what's in the back below here called the limbic system. The prefrontal cortex is where you process your logical, rational thoughts, right? You're listening to me right now, you're trying to understand what I say, that's processed here at the front, right? The back is your subconscious. It's your, your feelings, your intuitions, your routines, your automatic habits. All of that happens in the front. But here's the thing, right? If I were to tell you that in the front here, there are about 100 synaptic connections per minute, how many connections do you think happen at the back? Is it the same, higher, or lower? If you're guessing higher, how much higher? If it's 100 here, do you think it's 1,000 or 1,000,000 at the back? It's actually over 1 billion. So there's a lot more activity happening in our subconscious than in our conscious state. That is why, right, if we can't rewire the back of our brain, it doesn't work. Because, for example, right, even when it comes to health, right, when someone is told by their doctor, hey, I've just checked your blood sugar and your blood pressure, it looks very high, I need you to start, changing your diet, start exercising, manage your stress better, you say, yes, doctor, yes, doctor, yes, doctor. But what science shows, 74% of you do not listen to your doctor the moment you go home. Same thing with a diet. Your prefrontal cortex says, okay, I've just listened to Azran and I'm going to start having more eggs and spinach and less of that ice cream. What research shows, in less than 12 months' time, only 7% of you would have succeeded with your diet. 93% of you would have abandoned your diet, right? Gym memberships are full in January. Guess how many people are left in December? Only 28%. Fitbits, wearable. Wow, you get so excited with your Fitbit, you set up your 10,000 step WhatsApp group. By December, what science shows is 90% of you have deliberately lost your Fitbit, or you're probably wearing it just to tell the time. So change doesn't work with willpower and determination. Simply listening to Azran does not work. You might be motivated, but your motivation will last between 1 to 3 months. That is about it. Because if it's not wired at the back, it's not going to happen. And that is why, if we're kind of to really learn new techniques on dealing with stress and challenging it to positive energy, we need reinforcement every single day, right? That is how it goes from a conscious thought to a subconscious routine automatic habit. So I talked earlier about hormones like cortisol and adrenaline and norepinephrine that gets triggered when we're under a stressful situation. There's another stress hormone called oxytocin. Now, this might seem counterintuitive because some people associate oxytocin with a feel good. In fact, it's got a nickname called the cuddle hormone, right? Where when you feel in love and happy with someone, your oxytocin reaches out. But when we're under stress, right, the body is also sending out oxytocin throughout the body, not just in our heads, but throughout the whole body, because one of the ways of dealing with stress and channeling it into positive energy is to connect with people. And that is why social connectedness is a core pillar of mental fitness. Because when we can reach out with someone else, right, and we can bounce ideas, we validate what we're feeling, we start to make sense. The sheer act of trying to describe the stress that you're going through to someone else actually helps you process it. Because on your own, if you try to deal with stress on your own, your brain is going through overdrive. Like it's got 10 different thoughts in one place, you cannot focus. But the sheer act of having to explain to someone and listening to someone actually slows down the brain, distills it into a few points, and therefore you're actually better able to handle this. That is why, for example, right, when it comes to top performers, they focus on who can help me perform at my peak. Because whether you're Lewis Hamilton, Usain Bolt, the Manchester United football team, the New Zealand All Blacks team, you use your coaches not for can I get me stronger or faster, because actually there's not a lot of difference in terms of the physical training. But what sets the world champions apart from everyone else is the ability to focus. It's that last 0.1 second that makes the difference between first place and second place, between gold medal and silver medal. And there are tools and techniques that working with a coach allow you to focus on, right? And so I'm just to summarize with it, but for me, that's been my personal experience, right? To make that breakthrough from where I was to getting comfortable with swimming and to be able to complete Ironman triathlons was because I had my coach, Lance Watson, working through not just on terms of the physical training, but learning how to focus the mind to deal with the stressful situation of a race start. So the first thing is, while anybody technically can be helpful, the problem with most of our friends and family members is while they may be well-meaning, they can be very judgmental, right? You bring up a problem, hey, I'm under a lot of stress in this. The first thing they do is they just say, go see my guy, just do this, right? That's actually not helpful. You really need to actually have someone listen to you, and they're very specific listening techniques so that you feel safe to open up all the stress and pressures that you're dealing with, right? And then what a coach does is they help you turn that into specific actions, right? So for example, it's one thing for Lance to tell me, okay, look, Azran, right? When, I know you're going to feel very stressed out when the gun goes and you're supposed to jump into the sea with 1,000 other triathletes, but let's do these 5 small steps, right? Repeat again and again. So giving very, very specific tasks and then checking in every single day, every single week, does that work or not? And that is what allows the brain to re-imprint. And ultimately, someone to help you cope and solve problems, because whatever we try to do, we're going to hit roadblocks, we're going to hit setbacks and obstacles, but dealing with it ourselves is a lot harder than having someone who's trained to listen and help you distill, okay, option A doesn't work, what's option B, what's option C, what are the pros, what are the cons, what can I do? So by reaching out to someone, right, we can then turn that challenging pressure, that stress, and really train the brain to be a lot more focused into specific actions that allow us to perform at our best. So hopefully a little brief insight, but I hope you're ready to perform at your peak. I hope you're going to look at stress differently as a way that the body's sending you signals to be ready to take on that lion, because whether that lion is your boss, whether that lion is your clients, whether that lion is your competitors or your spouse or the bills at the end of the month, right? It's about being able to outsprint that lion, to turn stress not to be paralyzed by that fear and stress, but to turn it into specific actions that allow you to focus very, very clearly. So with that, I thank you very much and look forward to your questions. Thank you guys for joining me.
Hey, thank you so much, Mr. Azran. It was an awesome sharing, and it was so inspiring and motivating. So while our audience are flowing in with questions, we do have some questions already. All right.
Sure.
Okay, so first question from Peter.
Hi, Peter.
Azran, can you please share how you overcome COVID-19 impact on your current business or economic situation?
Wow. Okay. So few things, right? COVID-19, to me, to use an analogy, is like, if you're new to Formula One racing, right? Trying to think about a whole race can be so daunting. You feel like you want to give up because it doesn't make any sense, right? And so the way to train Formula One drivers, especially those who are not as experienced, is to do what we call focus on the next corner, right? So what you then say is, okay, don't think about the 56 laps. Just focus on the next right turn and make sure you execute that well. If you can execute that well, watch for the next corner, focusing on that. Because the problem with COVID-19 is too many things are happening, right? And if you try to make sense of it, here's the reality. No one absolutely knows. And that uncertainty can be paralyzing if you don't know what to do. And there's no right or wrong answer. But imagine if you told yourself, okay, whatever the situation is, I'm going to focus on 3 things that I'm going to execute this week, right? If I execute those 3 things, next Friday, by Friday, I'm going to check with my team. All right, guys, we tried those 3 things. Did it work? Cool. Let's do that again. Did it not work? Boy, okay, let's stop doing it. Okay, in this past week, what have we learned from our competitors, from our customers, from government, from everyone else, that we're going to try something new next week? Because when we learn to try something new next week, that's how we evolve and adapt. Because in moments of crisis, no one has visibility. And so the only thing we can do is figure out, let me do this. Did that work? Great, I keep doing it. If it doesn't work, change directions, move on to the next thing, move on to the next thing. So that's kind of, for me, one way of dealing with extreme uncertainty and crisis.
I see. So what I understand is that keep trying new things and don't afraid of failure. Even
Sure.
if failure, learn from it.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so another question from Peter. Can you please share how you handle the stress at Asia?
Wow. Okay. That should be called How Azran Lost His Hair. Lance, no, I do not know Simon Sinek, but I've watched his videos. But basically, I'm going to bundle that to also address Selena's question on, again, why multitasking doesn't work, right? So, to me, when I think about AirAsia, a few things come to mind. First, the thing I have to learn as a CEO is I don't have all the answers, and I don't need to be the one with all the answers. Oftentimes as leaders, right, we feel, oh, it's my job to make a decision, and I just tell my team to decide, right? But remember, the brain under attack is a brain that is looking for quick things that it's familiar with, right? And so I needed to pause and say, hang on, is that true or not? Just because every airline was doing it one way, does that mean we should be doing it that way, right? So for example, before AirAsia X, every low-cost airline in the world, right, did not do connecting flights. They believe in something called point-to-point travel, which means if you want to go from Penang to Bali and there's no direct flight, you have to buy 2 tickets, right? Penang, KL, KL, Bali, right? And they're 2 separate tickets. So if your Penang, KL flight is late, you miss your KL, Bali flight, you are screwed, right? And we say, well, just because every low-cost airline in the world does that, doesn't mean that it should be, the same case, right? Because we were seeing that our Australian passengers coming to KL were not stopping in KL. They waited for 6 hours to get on another flight to Bangkok or to Phuket or to Langkawi. And so we figured out how to do it without adding any cost. And 3 years later, connecting flight transfer passengers became 52% of our total passengers. And so therefore, number one, if we need to know how to not jump to these conclusions, I need to surround myself with people who can help me reflect and challenge, right? So that means, number one, is my team different from me? One of the worst mistakes we can make as a leader is to hire people with similar backgrounds. The second thing is you might hire people from different backgrounds, but if you don't give them a voice to speak, right, it's going to be very hard to get different ideas. They need to have the courage to be able to speak up. And there's another conversation where I talk about techniques about getting team members to speak up and not be afraid. So those are some of the crucial things to deal with a lot of hyper uncertainty in a crazy industry like airlines.
All right, thank you very much for the fruitful sharing. All right, so next question. Okay, Mr. Azran, how do we train ourselves and change our mentally on stress that way? Very much easier said than done.
Of course, 100%. So let's come back down to multitasking, because it seems to be a topic coming up over and over again from Selena, from Jezebel. Thank you for the questions, right? Because you're right, you want to focus on one task, but something keeps popping up and you get distracted, 100%. Now, I don't do this every day, but there are certain days when reports are due, there are deadlines, and I really need to focus. And therefore, when you need to perform, right, you've got to create your environment, set and arrange your environment correctly, which basically means first, close all your browser windows. Secondly, put the phone away, right? Because otherwise you're going to be you're going to be distracted with those notifications that keep coming back, a beep 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 beep, right? And so if you say, look, I need to check my emails at certain blocks of time, I'm only going to open up the email browser and pick up my phone then, because after that I've got to focus on writing this report. But if you have your phone open, you are setting yourself up for failure, because those things keep popping up again and again, and therefore your brain is going to jump. And the moment your brain jumps is when you lose the ability to focus, right? So another thing, by the way, that happens when it comes to focus is sleep. We didn't talk about this much earlier, but I don't know about you, but I have this problem because my head is kind of spinning around. I wake up in the middle of the night, right? I wake up at 1 a.m., I wake up at 3 a.m., and I've got all these thoughts. Oh my God, I've got deadline ahead, all these things happening. And so one technique to kind of help address that is I must have pen and paper right next to my bedside table, so that whenever a thought happens, I write it down. And by writing it down, I'm giving myself permission to let that thought go, because I know when I wake up in the morning, it's going to be there. But if you don't write it down, the brain keeps repeating the thought because the brain doesn't want you to forget it, right? And the more thoughts you have, the more you're going to lose sleep over. So it's the same principle that affects multitasking, right? Because remember, the enemy is jumping from one thought to the other. It's like anything in life, right? You know, how are you going to be good at being an athlete? How are you going to be good at doing, you know, let's say studying in school, if you know you read 2 paragraphs of one textbook and then you read another textbook for 1 paragraph and then you switch to another textbook? That's not going to be effective, right? So why do we do it at work?
All right. Okay, so I particularly like the fact that how we can prepare a piece of paper and pen right next to our bed, so that whenever we have to talk, we can write it down. Right, very cool. Very cool method we can try. Every one of us can try, especially for those who always overthink at night, who can't sleep. Okay, so next one. Mr. Azran, how do we always have positive mindset as well as always believe on ourselves that we can achieve dreams?
Wow. So the short answer is I'm not 100% always positive, right? The days when, you know, I'm going to feel really, really down. So there's a myth that somehow there's this one thing you do and you'll always be positive. It doesn't work. But the key thing, like a lot of things in life, is to be positive when it really matters, right? And other days you got to kind of let yourself down. And so there are 2 parts to this, right? The first part, coming all the way back to the early part of this presentation, is how do you set your cues, your environment, to get into that focus state, right? So I talked about the bracelets that I wear, the fragrances that I put on, and even a specific underwear that I wear only for special days, because all of the triggers that tell me, right, this is the day I need to perform. Right. And so, you know, that's the same thing with the music that we started to listen, right? It's very important to set that mindset that this is the day I need to perform, and it does wonders to help you focus. But the second part is, like the last way I ended this, it's very, very difficult to maintain that focus and to be positive by yourself. Because, you know, we naturally are humans, our emotions go up and down. So what we need is, when we're down, who's going to pick us back up, right? And so if someone is there to help us pick us back up, that is what is important. So I surround myself with people who I know will be positive enough to pick me up when I'm down. So whether it's at work, whether it's in the family system, and whether there's a specific set of friends that I go to who I know will listen to me and reinforce my beliefs rather than judge me and pass negative energy to me. So who you choose to spend time with is another crucial factor.
Yeah, how we choose who we would like to surround with, right? Very important point. All right, so let's take a look at YouTube, what comments we have. How do we train to be more focused on one task, even if we try to compartment our task, something will pop up and I might be distracted and
Well,
stop what I'm doing now and move to the other.
so I've addressed that, but I'm going to address Mayan's question, which is, how do you cope with colleagues who expect almost immediate replies to their text messages? And the thing is, first, you got to have a conversation, right? And the conversation is, guys, I need to work, right? So if you want, and if there's something really urgent, call me, right? But don't expect an immediate reply from WhatsApp or email messages, because I'm going to check my emails and WhatsApp messages and come back to you 4 times in a day, right? How many things in our business world that we need a reaction faster than 4 times in a day? I guarantee you it's less than 1 day a week, or 1 day a month, right? And so you've got to have the conversation with your colleagues to say, guys, we have to perform. We have to deliver. We've got targets. We've got deadlines. And so we've got to focus on one task at a time, and make sure you give them the video to this link if they still don't believe you, so that you can then watch it after, right? But if they really want an urgent response, that's what calls are for, right? But if you encourage them by responding to WhatsApp messages and emails immediately, you're reinforcing that expectation, right? So nothing beats being upfront about that, right up front.
All right, so I hope you guys benefited from this important point from Mr. Azran. Okay, so next one from Connie. Thanks for sharing, Azran. I missed the first part. Not sure, did you talk about procrastination, how to overcome it? I have this procrastination challenge.
Well, okay, so since we're out of time, we're going to see whether we can log all of these questions or if it still stays on YouTube. But I've got a link to a video that I did on procrastination. So I can see a lot of other questions, so we're going to try to respond to everyone with tips and links to other videos on these topics.
All right, so we have a few questions still there. Okay. Perhaps, would you like to answer it later or next time?
So why don't we log the questions? So I don't want to abandon anyone, but I'm also conscious that we're running out of time. It's after 2 o'clock. So let's try to log in and follow up on the chat after this.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much, Mr. Azran. Very fruitful sharing.
Guys. Thank you for joining.
You.
Great day ahead.
Yeah, thank you for joining, and see you guys next time. Bye-bye. Have a nice day.